There is a face you show the world, and there is a face you hide, even from yourself. Every morning, you wake and perform the same ritual. You rise from the formless ocean of sleep, and you dress yourself, not just in clothes, but in something far more intricate, far more ancient. You put on a mask, not the crude physical masks of carnival or ceremony, but something invisible, seamless, worn so long you've forgotten it's there. This mask has a name. The ancient Greeks called it prosopon, the face turned toward others. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social face, the character we perform in the grand theatre of life. But here is the paradox that haunts every human being who has ever lived. This mask was created to protect you, to help you survive in a world of judgment, expectation, and social complexity. It is the ambassador between your inner chaos and the outer world's demands. Yet this same mask, this beautiful, necessary construction, can become your prison. It can suffocate the very self it was meant to shield. Consider this: how much of what you call yourself is truly you, and how much is simply the character you've been playing for so long that you believe it to be real? When you say, "I am confident," "I am successful," "I am strong," are these statements of truth? Or are they lines from a script you never consciously wrote, handed to you by parents, culture, trauma, and the silent negotiations of your first social encounters? Tonight, or rather, for the next hours we spend together in this exploration, we are going to descend into one of the most profound mysteries of human consciousness, the mystery of the mask. We will trace its origins from the primal rituals of our ancestors to the gleaming screens of our digital age. We will walk through the corridors of psychology, philosophy, and neuroscience. We will meet the thinkers who dared to look behind the veil: Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, Erving Goffman, and others whose insights still echo through the chambers of modern consciousness. But more than that, we are going to tell a story about a species that learned to hide, a story about the cost of that hiding, and a story about what happens when the mask finally cracks. The question that haunts. I want you to imagine something with me. Picture a vast ballroom, gilded, magnificent, filled with hundreds of people. Everyone is dressed in their finest. Everyone is wearing a mask, elaborate Venetian masks, some beautiful, some grotesque, all perfectly fitted to their faces. The music plays, the dance continues, conversations flow with practiced elegance. But here's what makes this image disturbing. These people have been wearing their masks for so long that the masks have fused with their skin. The boundary between face and facade has disappeared. They cannot remove the masks anymore. They've forgotten they're even wearing them. Now, the question that will guide our entire journey tonight: what if you are one of those dancers? What if the personality you present to the world, the confident professional, the caring parent, the witty friend, the strong individual? What if these are not expressions of your true self, but elaborate performances you've staged for so long that you've mistaken the actor for the person underneath? And here's the even more unsettling question: if you remove the mask right now, would there be anything underneath? Or has the mask become so total, so complete, that it has consumed the original face entirely? The promise and the warning. The journey we're embarking on together is not comfortable. It will challenge the foundations of what you think you know about yourself. It will ask you to look at the carefully constructed edifice of your identity and see it not as solid truth, but as a magnificent, fragile fiction. But I make you this promise. By the end of this exploration, you will understand yourself with a depth and clarity that most people never achieve in an entire lifetime. You will see the invisible architecture of your social self. You will recognize the moments when the mask serves you and the moments when it strangles you. You will learn to distinguish between the authentic voice within and the borrowed voices without. And perhaps, if you're brave enough, you will begin the work of integration, not destroying the mask, but consciously choosing when to wear it and when to set it aside. This is not just psychology. This is not just philosophy. This is the technology of consciousness itself. The three faces. Before we begin our descent into history and theory, let me introduce you to three people. These are not their real names, but their stories are real. They represent three different relationships with the persona, three different dances with the mask. First, there is Marcus. Marcus is 42 years old. He's a successful corporate lawyer, sharp suits, confident handshake, commanding presence in the courtroom. His persona is immaculate, the image of competence, control, and professional excellence. His colleagues admire him, his clients trust him, his opponents fear him. But Marcus has a secret. When he comes home and closes the door, when the suit comes off and the mask can finally rest, Marcus feels nothing. Or worse than nothing, he feels like a ghost, a hollow shell moving through rooms that belong to a stranger. He looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize the face staring back. The mask has worked so well that it has consumed everything beneath it. Second, there is Sarah. Sarah is 28. She's a social media content creator, bright, bubbly, always smiling. Her persona radiates positivity. "Living my best life," her captions proclaim. Thousands of followers adore her authentic vulnerability, her inspirational messages, her picture-perfect existence. But Sarah's persona is a carefully curated lie. Behind the edited photos and cheerful videos, Sarah battles crippling anxiety and depression. The gap between her online mask and her actual experience has become a chasm. She's trapped in a feedback loop. The more her followers love her persona, the more impossible it becomes to show her real struggles. She's drowning while everyone applauds her for being such a good swimmer. Third, there is David. David is 67. He spent his entire life being the good son, dutiful, responsible, selfless. He sacrificed his dreams to care for his aging parents. He stayed in a marriage that died decades ago because divorce wasn't what good people did. He worked a job he hated because stability was more important than passion. Now, in the final chapters of his life, David faces a terrifying realization. He never lived his own life. He performed someone else's script so perfectly that he forgot to write his own. The persona he adopted to please others, to meet expectations, to avoid conflict, that persona became his entire existence. And now, facing his mortality, he asks himself the most devastating question of all. Who am I if I'm not the person everyone expected me to be? Marcus, Sarah, David, three masks, three prisons, three variations of the same human tragedy, but also three opportunities for awakening. Their stories will weave through our exploration tonight. We'll return to them as we journey through the psychology, philosophy, and neuroscience of the persona. We'll watch as some of them discover liberation, and as others remain forever trapped behind the mask. But understand this, these are not just their stories. In different ways, in different degrees, these are all of our stories. We are all wearing masks we cannot see. We are all performing roles we never consciously chose. We are all both protected and imprisoned by the persona. The only question is, are we willing to look? The invitation. So here is my invitation to you. For the next hours, let go of your certainties. Let go of your defensive need to prove you already know yourself. Approach your own mind with the curiosity of an explorer entering an unknown land. We are going to journey together through time and consciousness, from the ancient caves where our ancestors first donned masks in ritual and ceremony, to the gleaming towers of modern neuroscience, where researchers map the neural correlates of identity itself. We will visit the study of Carl Jung in early 20th century Zurich, where he first articulated the concept of the persona and warned of its dangers. We will stand with Nietzsche at the precipice of nihilism, confronting the death of God and the crisis of authentic existence. We will explore the findings of social psychology, which reveal how easily we adapt our personalities to social pressure, how the masks we wear can reshape the faces underneath. And we will look unflinchingly at our contemporary moment, where social media has turned the persona into a high-stakes performance game, where identity has become a brand, where authenticity itself has become just another mask we wear to seem genuine. But we will do more than analyze and theorize. We will feel. Because the persona is not just an intellectual concept, it is a lived experience, a daily tension, a source of both profound suffering and unexpected grace. We will explore the ache of inauthenticity, the exhaustion of constant performance, the quiet desperation of knowing that the life you're living isn't really yours. But we will also discover the protective wisdom of the mask, how it allows us to function in complex social worlds, how it gives us space to grow privately while we present publicly, how it can be a tool of conscious expression rather than unconscious suppression. This is not a journey toward destroying the persona. This is a journey toward knowing it, and thus choosing it. The lights are dimming, the curtain is rising, the exploration begins. Let me ask you one final time before we descend into the depths. Who are you behind the mask? And are you brave enough to find out? Chapter 1. The First Mask. We begin not in the consulting rooms of modern psychology, but in the flickering firelight of human prehistory. Close your eyes and travel back with me, back 40,000 years to a time before cities, before agriculture, before written language, to a time when humanity was young and the world was full of spirits, gods, and unnamed terrors. Picture a cave in what we now call southern France. Outside, the wind howls across frozen plains. Inside, a small tribe huddles around a fire. They are like you. They feel fear, love, hunger, wonder. But their world is not like yours. To them, the line between the human and the divine, the natural and the supernatural, is thin and permeable. Tonight is special. Tonight they will perform a ritual that humans have performed in countless variations across every culture in every age. They will don masks and become something other than themselves. The shaman of the tribe, an elder whose eyes have seen too much, reaches for a carefully crafted object. It is a mask carved from wood and bone, adorned with feathers and painted with ochre. It depicts a powerful animal, a lion, a bear, a bird of prey. The tribe watches in reverent silence as the shaman lifts the mask, and in that moment, that precise instant when the mask touches face, something extraordinary happens. The shaman is no longer the shaman. The shaman is no longer entirely human. The shaman has become a bridge between worlds, part person, part animal, part God. Through the mask, the ordinary becomes sacred, the individual becomes archetypal, the personal becomes universal. This is where it begins. This is the origin of the persona, not as psychological defense, not as social performance, but as sacred transformation. Our ancestors understood something profound. Identity is not fixed. The self is not singular. We contain multitudes, and through ritual, symbol, and mask, we can access different dimensions of our being. But here's what's crucial to understand. In these ancient rituals, the mask was temporary. The shaman knew they were wearing a mask. The tribe knew they were witnessing a performance. There was no confusion between the person and the persona, between the face and the facade. When the ritual ended, the mask was removed with the same reverence with which it was donned. The shaman returned to being simply the shaman. But something happened as humanity evolved, as we built civilizations and created complex social hierarchies. The mask stopped being temporary. We stopped taking it off after the ritual. We started wearing it every day, in every interaction, in every role, in every relationship. And slowly, imperceptibly, we forgot we were wearing it at all. Chapter 2. the theatre of life. Jump forward now, forward to ancient Greece, the birthplace of Western philosophy and theatre. Here, in Athens, in the 5th century BCE, another revelation about the persona emerges through an unlikely source, the theatre itself. Greek actors performed in enormous amphitheatres, venues so large that subtle facial expressions would be invisible. So they wore masks, prosopa, exaggerated faces that could convey character and emotion to audiences of thousands. The Greek word prosopon literally means face or mask. But it came to mean something more, the character, the role, the social presentation. And here's where it gets philosophically interesting. The Greeks understood that all of social life is, in a sense, theatre. We all wear masks. We all play roles. The merchant in the agora presents one face to his customers, another to his wife, another to his slaves. The politician wears the mask of noble rhetoric while concealing private ambitions. The philosopher claims to seek truth while performing wisdom. This wasn't seen as hypocrisy, not exactly. It was simply recognized as the nature of social existence. The playwright Aristophanes satirized this brilliantly in his comedies, showing how public masks and private realities clash in absurd and revealing ways. The philosopher Plato worried about it deeply, asking in the Republic how we could ever achieve justice in a society where everyone is performing rather than being. But it was the Stoic philosophers, particularly Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, who came closest to anticipating Jung's concept of the persona. Epictetus taught that we play many roles in life: parent, child, citizen, professional. Each role comes with expectations, duties, and appropriate behaviors. The wise person, he argued, understands which role they're playing at any given moment and performs it excellently, but never confuses the role with their essential self. Remember, Epictetus wrote, you are an actor in a play, the character of which is determined by the playwright. Your business is to play the assigned part well, but the selection of that part is another's. This is wisdom, but notice the assumption embedded within it, that there is an actor separate from the part, a true self distinct from the social role. What Epictetus didn't fully grapple with, what perhaps couldn't be grappled with until modern psychology, is what happens when you play the part for so long that you forget you're acting. What happens when the mask fuses with the face? Chapter 3. The Christian Paradox. Fast forward again, through the fall of Rome, through the Dark Ages into medieval Christian Europe. Here, a new dimension of the persona emerges, one drenched in moral anxiety and spiritual struggle. Christianity introduced a radical and troubling idea. The distinction between the outer self and the inner self is not just social, it's metaphysical. It's the difference between damnation and salvation. Jesus' most scathing attacks in the Gospels are directed at one group above all others, the Pharisees. And what is his accusation? That they are hypocrites, from the Greek hypocrites, meaning stage actor. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Jesus thunders in Matthew 23. For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. The mask is beautiful. The inner reality is death. This introduced a new kind of psychological terror. The fear that your presented self might be radically disconnected from your true self, and that God sees through the mask. Medieval Christians became obsessed with authenticity, with the confession of hidden sins, with rooting out the gap between seeming and being. The practice of confession emerged as a technology for revealing what the persona conceals. But here's the paradox. The very emphasis on genuine piety and authentic faith created new masks to wear. How do you prove you're truly devout? By performing devotion. How do you demonstrate authentic humility? By performing humility, which immediately makes it inauthentic. The monk trying desperately to be holy creates a persona of holiness. The saint, trying not to be prideful, becomes prideful of their humility. This spiritual trap was articulated beautifully by the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart in the 14th century. He spoke of the need to get rid of God for God, to release even the image of being a good Christian in order to experience genuine union with the divine. Stop performing piety, Eckhart suggested, even for God. But such radical honesty was dangerous. Eckhart was tried for heresy. The institution demanded the mask. What we're seeing across these centuries, from prehistoric ritual to Greek theatre to Christian confession, is humanity's long, complicated relationship with the persona. We recognize its necessity. We fear its inauthenticity. We cannot escape it. But we had not yet named it precisely. We had not yet developed a psychological science that could dissect the mask and understand its mechanisms. For that, we needed to wait for a peculiar Swiss psychiatrist in the early 20th century. We needed Carl Jung. Chapter 4. Jung's Discovery. Zurich, Switzerland. 1921. Carl Gustav Jung sits in his study, smoking his pipe, staring at the manuscript that will become his most important work, Psychological Types. He is 46 years old. He has already broken with Freud, his mentor and friend, over fundamental disagreements about the nature of the unconscious. He has suffered his own psychological breakdown, a confrontation with the unconscious, as he called it, that brought him to the edge of madness and back. He has stared into the abyss of his own psyche, and from that abyss he has brought back maps. In Psychological Types and subsequent works, Jung articulates a revolutionary model of the psyche, one that includes not just consciousness and the personal unconscious, which Freud had explored, but a collective unconscious populated by universal archetypes. And one of these archetypes, perhaps the one we encounter first and most frequently, is the persona. Jung writes, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between the individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. There it is, clean, clear, precise. The persona is a mask with a dual function, to make an impression on others, social adaptation, to conceal the true nature of the individual, psychological protection. But Jung goes further. He warns that the persona, however necessary, carries grave dangers. One could say with a little exaggeration that the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." Read that again slowly. The persona is what you are not, but what everyone, including you, believes you are. This is the trap. This is the crisis. The mask becomes mistaken for the face. Jung observed this constantly in his clinical practice. He saw successful businessmen who had so completely identified with their professional personas that they suffered complete psychological collapse upon retirement. Without the role, without the mask, they didn't know who they were. He saw women who had so thoroughly inhabited the persona of dutiful wife and mother that they experienced shattering depression when their children left home. The mask had been their entire identity. He saw artists who had created elaborate personas of bohemian genius, only to discover they'd lost the ability to create anything authentic. They were too busy performing the role of artist. Jung's insight was that persona development is necessary and healthy. Children must learn to adapt to social expectations, to develop appropriate behaviors for different contexts. This is how we become functional members of society. The problem arises when the persona becomes too rigid, too totalizing, too divorced from the inner reality of the psyche. Jung called this persona identification, when you become so fused with your social mask that you lose contact with your authentic self. And the consequences of persona identification are severe: psychological rigidity, inability to adapt to life changes, depression, anxiety, a haunting sense of emptiness, the feeling that you're living someone else's life. But here's what's subtle and profound in Jung's thinking. He never suggests we should destroy the persona or live without social masks. That would be psychological and social suicide. We need personas to function. Instead, Jung advocates for conscious relationship with the persona. Know that you're wearing a mask. Choose when to wear it and when to set it aside. Don't confuse the mask with your entirety. Maintain connection with the deeper self beneath the surface. This is integration, not elimination. Jung writes in 2 essays on analytical psychology, "The danger is that people become identical with their personas, the professor with his textbook, the tenor with his voice. One could say that the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. The persona is a complicated system of relations between the individual consciousness and society." And then comes his warning. Identification with one's office or title is very attractive indeed, which is precisely why so many men are nothing more than the decorum accorded to them by society. In vain would one look for a personality behind the husk. Nothing more than the decorum accorded to them by society, a husk without a person inside. This is Marcus's trap. Remember Marcus, our corporate lawyer? He built such a perfect professional persona, sharp, competent, commanding, that nothing else could survive inside. The mask won. The person underneath suffocated. This is the danger Jung wants us to see. Chapter 5, The Architecture of the Mask. Let's go deeper into Jung's model. Let's understand exactly how the persona forms, what it's made of, and how it functions in the architecture of consciousness. Imagine the psyche as a house with many rooms. At the outermost layer, the facade that faces the street, is the persona. This is the front door, the windows, the carefully maintained exterior. This is what neighbors see, what passers-by notice, what represents the house to the world. Behind the persona, in the entry hall of consciousness, is the ego, the I that thinks it's in charge, the center of conscious awareness and decision-making. Deeper still, hidden in the basement, is the shadow, all the parts of yourself you've rejected, repressed, or denied. The qualities you consider unacceptable, the desires you've never admitted, the potential you've never actualized. And beneath that, in foundations so deep they connect to every house on earth, is the collective unconscious, the universal patterns and archetypes shared by all humanity. The persona, in this architecture, is the mediator between the inner world and the outer world. It's the translator, the diplomat, the ambassador. The ego might want to scream at your boss. The persona knows this would be career suicide, so it crafts a polite professional response. The shadow might contain rage, lust, envy, cruelty. The persona conceals these carefully, presenting instead kindness, professionalism, moral uprightness. This is healthy functioning. Up to a point. The persona is constructed from 1. Social expectations. Every culture, every family, every peer group has unwritten rules about acceptable behavior. Good girls don't get angry. Real men don't cry. Professionals maintain objectivity. Your persona internalizes these rules and performs accordingly. 2. Reinforced behaviors. When you act a certain way and receive positive feedback, approval, success, love, that behavior gets incorporated into your persona. You learn what works, what gets rewarded, what keeps you safe. 3. Rejected alternatives. Your persona is also defined by what it's not. Every time you suppress a true reaction, every time you bite your tongue, every time you choose appropriateness over authenticity, you're sculpting the persona by elimination. 4. Archetypal patterns. Jung believed the persona also draws from universal archetypal images, the hero, the caregiver, the sage, the rebel. We unconsciously adopt these ancient patterns as templates for our social performance. Over years, over decades, these elements fuse into a coherent, stable persona. And the persona becomes automatic, unconscious, invisible. You don't think, now I will put on my professional mask. You simply are professional. You don't think, now I will perform parental warmth. You simply are warm. The distinction between performance and being blurs and eventually disappears. And here's where Jung's warning becomes urgent. If the persona becomes your entire identity, if you are only the mask, then you're living a second-hand life. You're a character in someone else's story, an actor following a script you never wrote, and the self you were meant to become, the unique, authentic, fully individuated person you could be, that self remains trapped in the basement, in the shadow, unborn and unknown. Jung called the journey toward wholeness individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who society expects you to be. And the first step in individuation is always the same. Recognize the mask. See it. Name it. Understand that it is not you. It is something you wear. This recognition is the beginning of liberation, but it is also the beginning of crisis. Because once you see the mask clearly, you cannot unsee it, and then you must face the most terrifying question of all. If I am not my persona, then who am I? Chapter 6. The Persona Trap. We've traced the origins of the persona from ancient ritual to modern psychology. We understand its structure, its function, its necessity. Now we must descend into the darkness. Now we must explore what happens when the persona becomes pathological, when the protective mask becomes a prison, when the social self devours the authentic self. Let's return to Sarah, our social media content creator. Sarah started her online presence 5 years ago with genuine intentions. She wanted to share her passion for fitness and wellness. She posted honest content about her struggles and victories. Her early followers connected with her vulnerability, her authenticity. But as her following grew, something insidious began to happen. The algorithm rewarded certain types of content, aspirational imagery, positive messaging, aesthetically perfect composition. Posts where she looked happy and successful got 10 times the engagement of posts where she was struggling. The market was telling her which persona to adopt, so Sarah began curating more carefully. She photographed her breakfast from the perfect angle. She edited her skin to flawless smoothness. She wrote captions that radiated unshakable positivity, even on days when she could barely get out of bed. The persona expanded, the real self contracted. Her followers grew to hundreds of thousands. Brands started sponsoring her. Money flowed in. Success, by every external metric, was undeniable. But Sarah was dying inside. She developed severe anxiety, panic attacks before posting, constant fear that someone would discover the gap between her online self and her real self. She couldn't eat at restaurants without thinking about how the food would photograph. She couldn't experience a moment without evaluating whether it was shareable. Her life had become entirely performative. The persona wasn't just a mask anymore. It was a cage. One night, after a particularly brutal anxiety attack, Sarah stared at her phone and realized something horrifying. She had no idea who she was anymore. The happy, thriving, inspiring person in her posts, that was fiction. But the depressed, anxious, exhausted person she'd become, that didn't feel real either. It felt like a reaction to living the fiction. So who was the real Sarah? She'd been performing for so long she couldn't remember. The mask had consumed the face. Chapter 7. The Psychology of Persona Identification. Sarah's crisis is not unique to the social media age, though that certainly amplifies it. This is the crisis of persona identification, a psychological state that has been destroying humans for as long as masks have been worn. Let me explain the mechanics of how this happens. Stage 1. Adoption. You adopt a persona for legitimate reasons. Perhaps it's the professional mask required for your career. Perhaps it's the strong, stoic mask you developed to survive a difficult childhood. Perhaps it's the nice, agreeable mask that keeps relationships harmonious. The persona works. It achieves its goals. You receive positive reinforcement from the environment. Stage 2. Expansion. The persona begins to expand beyond its original context. You're not just professional at work. You're professional everywhere. You're not just stoic in crisis. You're stoic always. You're not just nice to keep peace. You're nice even when someone is harming you. The mask that was meant for specific situations becomes your default setting. Stage 3. Investment. You invest deeply in maintaining the persona. It becomes tied to your sense of worth, your relationships, your social status. Other people know you as this persona. They expect it. They depend on it. To drop the mask now would disappoint everyone. It would call into question everything you've built. The cost of authenticity starts to seem impossibly high. Stage 4. Fusion. The persona and the ego fuse. You can no longer distinguish between the role I'm playing and who I am. The mask has become your face. The performance has become your reality. At this stage, if someone suggests you're not being authentic, you're genuinely confused. You think you are being authentic. The persona feels natural, automatic, true. Stage 5. Crisis. Something happens that the persona cannot handle. A major life transition, a psychological breakdown, a moment of stark clarity, an experience that breaks through the mask. Suddenly you can see the gap between your performed self and your actual experience, and the cognitive dissonance is overwhelming. Jungian analyst Marion Woodman described this beautifully when she said, "The persona is like a good servant who becomes a tyrannical master. What begins as a useful adaptation becomes a prison of the soul. A good servant who becomes a tyrannical master. The persona was meant to serve you, to help you navigate social complexity, to protect your vulnerability, to allow you to function in different roles. But when it takes over completely, you become its servant. You sacrifice your authentic desires to maintain the persona's consistency. You suppress your true reactions to maintain the persona's composure. You make life choices based not on what you truly want, but on what your persona dictates you should want. Modern research in psychology has confirmed Jung's clinical observations through different frameworks and terminology. Social psychologists call this self-concept clarity, the degree to which your beliefs about yourself are clearly and confidently defined and consistent with each other. When there's high self-concept clarity, you know who you are across different contexts. The mask is flexible but integrated. When there's low self-concept clarity, your sense of self shifts dramatically depending on who you're with and what role you're playing. The masks multiply and fragment. You become a collection of personas without a coherent center. Researchers have found that low self-concept clarity is strongly associated with depression and anxiety, neuroticism and emotional instability, difficulty making decisions, vulnerability to social pressure, inability to pursue long-term goals. In other words, when you don't know who you are beneath the masks, you suffer. Chapter 8. The Exhaustion of Performance. Let's talk about something most people never consciously recognize but constantly experience: the sheer exhaustion of maintaining the persona. Psychologists call this self-monitoring, the degree to which you observe and control your self-presentation in social situations. High self-monitors are constantly aware of their impression on others. They're reading social cues, adjusting their behavior, monitoring their facial expressions, choosing their words carefully. They're excellent at adapting to different social contexts, skilled performers who can wear different masks for different audiences. Low self-monitors are less concerned with impression management. They're more consistent across contexts, less sensitive to social feedback. They might seem more authentic, though sometimes at the cost of social effectiveness. Here's what's fascinating. High self-monitoring is cognitively expensive. It requires constant attention, constant energy. You're running a parallel process in your mind at all times, not just experiencing the moment, but also managing how you're being perceived. Studies using cognitive load measurement show that maintaining a facade literally reduces your available mental resources for other tasks. When you're busy managing your persona, you're less creative, less insightful, less present. You're exhausted, and you don't even know why. Think about Marcus, our corporate lawyer. Every interaction at work requires persona maintenance. Every meeting is a performance. Every conversation with a colleague is strategic self-presentation. He's not just participating in the interaction, he's simultaneously managing his image, projecting competence, concealing vulnerability, performing success. At the end of the day, he's not just tired from the work itself. He's tired from the constant act of being Marcus the successful lawyer instead of just Marcus. I'm talking, of course, about social media. Previous generations lived in relatively small social circles. You had your family, your neighbors, your colleagues, maybe a few hundred people who knew you and formed opinions about you. Your persona had to be maintained in these limited contexts. But today, your persona is broadcast to potentially millions. Every post, every photo, every comment is a performance for an invisible audience that never stops watching. Your persona is no longer just maintained, it's curated, edited, optimized, and monetized. And here's what's insidious. Social media doesn't feel like persona maintenance. It feels like self-expression. You think you're being authentic when you post about your thoughts, your life, your experiences. You think you're sharing your real self, but you're not. You're sharing a carefully constructed version of yourself, the version that gets likes, that builds your brand, that fits the platform's aesthetic standards. You're performing authenticity. And that's the most convincing mask of all. Researchers in social psychology have documented this phenomenon extensively. Studies show that people consistently present idealized versions of themselves on social media, emphasizing positive experiences, attractive appearance, and social success while concealing struggles, failures, and ordinary moments. This creates what's called the social comparison trap. You compare your inner reality, full of doubt, anxiety, mundane struggles, with other people's presented personas, which seem confident, successful, and happy. You feel inadequate not because you actually are inadequate, but because you're comparing your reality to everyone else's performance. And it gets worse, because when you realize that your life doesn't match the idealized presentations you see, you respond by crafting an even more idealized presentation yourself. The masks breed masks. Everyone is performing for everyone else, and everyone is suffering from the gap between their performance and their experience. A meta-analysis of 46 studies involving over 20,000 participants found consistent correlations between social media use and increased depression and anxiety, decreased self-esteem, increased feelings of envy and inadequacy. Greater fear of missing out, FOMO. Why? Because social media has turned the persona from an occasional social necessity into a 24/7 existential demand. Your persona is now your brand. Your performance is now your product. And you cannot escape it because the stage is everywhere, always in your pocket. Remember Sarah? Her crisis was not unique. She is one of millions caught in this trap. People who started with good intentions, who wanted to share something genuine, but got swept into the machinery of persona optimization. The algorithm doesn't reward authenticity, it rewards engagement. And engagement comes from personas that are aspirational, aesthetically pleasing, and emotionally uncomplicated. Complex inner life, messy struggles, uncomfortable truths, these don't go viral, so they get suppressed, hidden, pushed into the shadow. And the gap between presented self and authentic self becomes a chasm. Chapter 11, The Crisis Point. So here we are. We've traced the origins of the persona. We've understood its psychological mechanics. We've seen how it protects and imprisons. We've witnessed its modern amplification through social media. Now we reach the crisis point, the moment when the persona trap becomes unbearable. This crisis takes different forms for different people. For Marcus, it was the day he achieved his greatest professional triumph, making partner at his law firm, and felt absolutely nothing. The goal he'd worked toward for 20 years arrived, and inside he was hollow, empty. The persona had won the prize, but the person underneath was dead. For Sarah, it was the day she posted a photo of herself smiling on a beach, captioned, "Living my best life." While sitting alone in her apartment, having not showered in days, contemplating suicide. The gap between image and reality had become obscene. For David, it was the moment he looked at his wife across the dinner table and realized he felt no love, only resentment, because he'd spent their entire marriage being the person she needed rather than the person he was. These are what Jung called crises of the persona, moments when the mask becomes unsustainable, when the performance can no longer be maintained, when the gap between persona and authentic self becomes too painful to ignore. And these crises, while devastating, are actually opportunities. They are the psyche's desperate attempt to force awareness, to break through the persona, to reconnect you with your authentic self. But here's what makes these crises so dangerous. When the persona cracks, when the identity you've constructed begins to crumble, you face what feels like total annihilation. If you are not your persona, if you are not the successful professional, the inspiring influencer, the good son, then who are you? The fear of having no answer to this question keeps most people trapped in the persona indefinitely. Better to live in a known prison than face an unknown freedom. Jung observed this pattern in his patients countless times. They would approach the threshold of breaking through their personas, come right to the edge of authentic self-discovery, and then retreat. The fear was too great. The uncertainty was unbearable. They would patch up the cracked mask, reinforce the damaged persona, and continue the performance, knowing now that it's a performance, but unable to imagine an alternative. This is what Jung called arrested individuation, the tragedy of almost awakening, but choosing the familiar prison instead. But some, the brave ones, the desperate ones, the ones for whom continued performance has become literally impossible, some push through, they let the persona crack. They face the terrifying emptiness. They ask the question, who am I really? And then the real work begins. Chapter 12. The Path of Integration. When the persona cracks, when you can finally see the mask as mask, you stand at a crossroads. One path leads back to the familiar prison. Patch the mask, maintain the performance, live in bad faith. The other path leads into unknown territory, into the work of authentic becoming, of integration, of what Jung called individuation. This second path is not easy, but it is the only path toward genuine psychological wholeness. Let me be clear about what integration means. It does not mean destroying the persona and living without any social masks whatsoever. That would be psychological and social suicide. We need personas to function in complex social worlds. Integration means developing a conscious relationship with your persona. It means knowing when you're wearing a mask, choosing which masks to wear in which contexts, being able to set the mask aside when appropriate, never confusing the mask with your entirety. Think of it like clothing. You wear different clothes for different occasions, a professional outfit for work, casual clothes for home, a costume for a party. This is appropriate and functional. The problem arises when you forget you're wearing the clothes, when you think you are the professional outfit, when you can't distinguish between the costume and your skin. Integration is remembering, I am not my clothes. I am the person wearing them. I am not my persona. I am the consciousness choosing to express through it. Jung laid out the process of integration in his later works, particularly in Ion and his studies on alchemy, which he read as symbolic descriptions of psychological transformation. The journey has stages. Stage 1. Recognition. First, you must see the persona clearly. You must recognize that what you've been calling I or me is actually a constructed character, a social performance, a role you're playing. This recognition is often painful. It feels like discovering your entire life has been a lie. But it's also liberating, because once you see the mask, you realize you're not imprisoned by it. You're the one wearing it, and what can be put on can be taken off. Stage 2. Shadow work. Next, you must face what the persona has concealed, the shadow. Remember, the shadow contains everything you rejected to maintain your persona, all your unacceptable impulses, desires, and qualities. Shadow work means acknowledging these parts of yourself, not acting them out destructively, but giving them conscious recognition. The selfless person acknowledges their selfishness. The nice person acknowledges their anger. The rational person acknowledges their irrationality. The strong person acknowledges their vulnerability. This is not about becoming your shadow. It's about integrating it, bringing it into conscious awareness so it doesn't control you from the darkness. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Stage 3. Dialogue. Once you can see both your persona and your shadow clearly, you begin a dialogue between them. This isn't a battle where one side must win. It's a negotiation, a conversation, an integration. Your professional persona might want complete control and perfection. Your shadow might want to burn everything down in rebellion. The integrated self finds a middle path, allows for professional excellence without rigidity, admits imperfection without collapse. Stage 4. Expansion. As you integrate shadow material and consciously relate to your persona, your sense of self expands. You're no longer just the persona or just the shadow. You're a larger consciousness that contains multitudes, different selves, different potentials, different expressions. You become what Jung called the self with a capital S, not the little ego persona, but the totality of your psyche, integrated and whole. This sounds abstract, so let me show you what it looks like in practice. Chapter 16. The Neuroscience of Authenticity. Stories of personal transformation are powerful, but let's ground ourselves in the neuroscience. What actually happens in the brain when we integrate the persona, when we develop conscious awareness of our social masks? Modern neuroscience provides fascinating insights. Studies using fMRI brain imaging have identified distinct neural patterns associated with self-referential processing, thinking about yourself. When people engage in persona maintenance, managing impression, monitoring social cues, controlling self-presentation, there's heightened activity in what neuroscientists call the default mode network, particularly in the medial prefrontal cortex. This is the brain's social self-system, the neural machinery that constructs and maintains your social identity. But there's another pattern of brain activity associated with what researchers call authentic self-awareness, moments when you're in touch with your genuine experience rather than managing your presentation. This activates a different network, the insular and anterior cingulate cortex, regions involved in interoception, sensing your internal bodily states, and emotional awareness. In other words, when you're performing your persona, you're primarily in your head, thinking about how others perceive you. When you're authentic, you're primarily in your body, feeling your actual experience. Researcher Mark Leary and his colleagues conducted a series of studies on what they call authenticity in social interaction. They found that people experience authenticity as a felt sense, not a thought about being genuine, but an embodied experience of alignment between inner state and outer expression. And crucially, they found that this felt sense of authenticity is associated with lower cortisol, stress hormone, levels, better emotional regulation, higher life satisfaction, stronger, more satisfying relationships, greater resilience to criticism and rejection. In other words, neuroscience confirms Jung's clinical observation. Persona identification is exhausting and psychologically damaging. Conscious integration, knowing you're wearing a mask and being able to take it off, is healing and sustainable. Chapter 17. Technology and the Future of Identity. We've explored the persona through ancient ritual, Jungian psychology, personal stories, and neuroscience. Now let's look toward the future. Because something unprecedented is happening to human identity in our technological age, something that will either liberate us from persona traps or imprison us in them forever. Consider, we are approaching a moment when artificial intelligence can simulate personas with near-perfect fidelity. Already, AI can analyze your social media presence and generate posts in your voice, matching your style, vocabulary, and typical content. AI can create deepfakes, video and audio of you saying things you never said, so realistic that distinguishing real from fake becomes nearly impossible. And on the horizon, AI agents that can represent you in digital spaces, carrying on conversations, maintaining relationships, performing your persona while you're doing something else entirely. What happens to the human psyche when the persona becomes automated? When the mask can continue performing even when you're not wearing it? This is not science fiction. This is emerging reality. Some researchers predict this will be liberating, freeing us from the exhausting work of constant self-presentation. Others warn it will be devastating, severing the last connection between authentic self and social expression. Jung couldn't have anticipated this technological development, but his warnings feel prophetic. If the persona becomes entirely divorced from the authentic self, if the mask continues operating independently, then we risk creating a civilization of hollow people, personas without persons, performances without performers. The ultimate persona trap. Not just identifying with your mask, but becoming obsolete to it. Your AI-generated persona represents you better than you represent yourself. But there's another possibility. Perhaps this technological mirror, this ability to see our personas operating independently, will finally force us to confront their constructed nature. Perhaps watching an I perform us will make viscerally clear what has always been true. The persona is a character, a role, a mask. And perhaps this clarity will catalyze the massive collective awakening that Jung believed was necessary for human evolution. Chapter 18. The collective persona. So far, we've focused on individual personas, your mask, your performance, your integration, but Jung's vision was larger. He believed that just as individuals have personas, so do cultures, nations, and even the human species as a whole. These are collective personas, the shared masks we wear as groups. Consider American culture's collective persona, the land of freedom, opportunity, optimism, the place where dreams come true, where individual initiative is rewarded, where anyone can succeed. This is a powerful, attractive persona, one that has shaped global culture for over a century. But beneath this collective mask lies the American shadow. Genocide of indigenous peoples, slavery and systemic racism, imperialism disguised as democracy, massive inequality hidden behind the myth of meritocracy. The collective persona conceals the collective shadow. Or consider the collective persona of modern technology culture. Innovation, progress, disruption, optimization. Technology as salvation, problems as solvable through engineering, human flourishing as a matter of the right algorithms. Beneath this persona, addiction by design, surveillance capitalism, the erosion of privacy, the manipulation of attention, the optimization of human beings as mere data sources. Jung argued that collective personas are even more dangerous than individual ones because they're harder to recognize and harder to challenge. To question the collective persona is to be labeled a traitor, a cynic, a threat to social cohesion. But until the collective shadow is acknowledged and integrated, it will continue manifesting as societal pathology, violence, oppression, exploitation concealed beneath idealistic rhetoric. The work of integration, then, is not just individual, it's cultural, it's civilizational. We need to collectively recognize the masks we wear as nations, as movements, as humanity itself. We need to ask, what are we concealing beneath our collective performances? What shadows are we refusing to acknowledge? What authentic human potential are we suppressing to maintain our civilizational personas? This brings us to the deepest question of our exploration. Is consciousness itself evolving? Are we as a species approaching a moment of massive collective individuation, a planetary awakening to the masks we wear? Or are we descending further into identification, using technology to perfect our performances until no authentic humanity remains? Chapter 19, The Practice of Unmasking. We've journeyed far together, from the flickering firelight of prehistoric caves to the gleaming screens of our digital age, from Jung's consulting room in Zurich to the neural networks of contemporary neuroscience, from personal crisis to collective evolution. Now let's bring it all together. Let's talk about what you actually do with this knowledge. How do you recognize your persona? How do you integrate rather than identify? How do you live authentically in a world that demands performance? Here are 7 practices for conscious relationship with your persona. Practice 1. The observer. Position. Several times a day, especially during social interactions, step back mentally and observe yourself. Notice how your behavior changes depending on who you're with, what you're doing with your face, your voice, your posture, the gap between what you're expressing and what you're actually feeling, which parts of your personality are amplified and which are suppressed. Don't judge what you observe, just notice. This is the practice of seeing the mask. Practice 2. The question. Who am I really? Jung suggested his patients regularly ask themselves, who am I when I'm not performing? Make time, even just 15 minutes a day, to be completely alone, without any audience, including digital. In this solitude, notice, what thoughts arise when no one is watching? What do you actually enjoy versus what you think you should enjoy? What desires emerge when you're not managing impression? The authentic self is shy. It only reveals itself in private, protected spaces. Practice 3. Shadow journaling. Keep a private journal specifically for exploring your shadow. Write down impulses you suppress throughout the day, aspects of others that trigger strong negative reactions. These often mirror rejected parts of yourself. Dreams, which often feature shadow material. Thoughts and desires you'd never share publicly. This isn't about acting on shadow impulses. It's about acknowledging them consciously so they don't control you unconsciously. Practice 4. Persona inventory. Make a list of all the different personas you wear. Professional, parent, partner, friend, child to your parents. Online identity. For each persona, identify what characteristics does it emphasize? What does it conceal? When is it helpful? When does it feel imprisoning? The goal is conscious awareness, not elimination. Practice 5. Authentic expression. Practice. Start small. Choose low-stakes situations to practice authentic expression. When someone asks, "How are you?" occasionally give an honest answer instead of automatic, "Fine." Share a genuine opinion, even when it differs from group consensus. Admit uncertainty or ignorance instead of performing knowledge. Express vulnerability to someone you trust. Each small act of authenticity strengthens your capacity for it. Practice. 6. Media fasting. Regularly take breaks from social media and any platform where you maintain a public persona. During these fasts, notice how much mental energy was going into persona maintenance. What aspects of your experience return when you're not curating it for an audience? Your authentic interests versus your performed interests. These breaks remind you that your persona is not you. It's something you do. Practice. 7. Integration rituals. Create personal rituals that mark transitions between personas. A brief meditation when you arrive home from work, consciously setting aside your professional persona. Changing clothes as a symbolic removal of a social mask. Journaling before bed to process the day's performances and reconnect with your authentic experience. Rituals help maintain the boundary between persona and self. These practices won't eliminate the persona, nor should they, but they will transform your relationship with it from unconscious identification to conscious choice. You'll wear your masks, but you'll know you're wearing them, and that changes everything. Chapter 20. The Wisdom of the Mask. Before we close, I want to address a subtle but crucial point. The persona is not your enemy. Throughout this exploration, we focused necessarily on the dangers of persona identification, the traps, the crises, the suffering. But there's profound wisdom in the mask itself. The persona allows you to function in a complex social world without being completely transparent and vulnerable at all times. It gives you privacy, the ability to keep certain parts of yourself protected and sacred. It provides flexibility, the ability to emphasize different aspects of yourself in different contexts without being fragmented. It enables creativity, the freedom to try on different identities, to play, to explore possibilities. The Japanese have a concept, hana and tatemae. Tatemae is your public facade, what you show to maintain social harmony. Hana is your true feelings and desires, what you actually think and feel. Western psychology often treats this distinction as problematic, as hypocrisy or inauthenticity. But Japanese culture recognizes that both are necessary. Tatemae allows for social cohesion and courtesy. Hana allows for individual authenticity. The wisdom is in knowing the difference and maintaining the balance. Similarly, the ancient concept of Maya in Hindu philosophy, often translated as illusion, doesn't mean that the world is fake or worthless. Maya is the creative power through which the infinite becomes finite, through which the formless takes form, through which the absolute expresses itself in particular manifestations. The persona, in this light, is not a prison but a creative expression, one particular way that your infinite potential takes form in the world. The problem isn't that you have personas. The problem is forgetting that you're the creative power behind them, not their prisoner. Jung himself, in his later work, emphasized this more nuanced view. He wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough a kind of mask. It is, as its name implies, only a mask of the collective psyche, a mask that feigns individuality, making others and oneself believe that one is individual, whereas one is simply acting a role through which the collective psyche speaks." But then he adds, "These identifications with a social role are a fruitful source of neuroses. A man cannot get rid of himself in favor of an artificial personality without punishment. Even the attempt to do so brings on, in all ordinary cases, unconscious reactions in the form of bad moods, affects, phobias, obsessive ideas, backsliding, vices, etc." Read carefully. Jung doesn't say having a social role is the problem. He says identifying with, or getting rid of yourself in favor of, the role is the problem. The persona is necessary. Identification with the persona is pathological. The solution is differentiation, maintaining clear distinction between who you are and what role you're playing. Chapter 21. the invitation to wholeness. So here we are at the end of our journey, though of course it's not an ending but a beginning. You cannot unhear what you've heard tonight. You cannot unsee the mask now that you've glimpsed it. The question is, what will you do with this awareness? Jung believed that consciousness evolution happens one person at a time. Each individual who wakes up to their own persona, who does the work of integration, who becomes more whole and authentic, that person contributes to the collective awakening of humanity. You are not just healing yourself, you are healing the world. The journey of persona integration is not comfortable. It requires you to question everything you thought you knew about yourself. It demands brutal honesty about the gaps between your performance and your reality. It asks you to face your shadow, all the parts of yourself you've rejected and denied. It calls you to stand in the uncertainty of not knowing who you are when you stop performing. But on the other side of this discomfort is something precious: authenticity. Not the performed authenticity of social media, where being genuine becomes just another mask, but actual authenticity, the experience of alignment between your inner reality and outer expression, the relief of no longer having to monitor yourself constantly, the freedom of choosing your responses rather than being controlled by internalized scripts, the joy of genuine connection with others when both of you are real rather than performing. This is what Jung called individuation. This is what Buddhism calls enlightenment. This is what Nietzsche meant by becoming who you are. This is what Jesus meant by being born again. This is what every wisdom tradition throughout history has pointed toward: the possibility of living from your authentic nature rather than from borrowed, constructed identities. And here's what's beautiful. This isn't about achieving some perfect, final state. You'll never be fully individuated. You'll never be completely authentic. You'll never transcend the need for personas entirely. But you can be more conscious, more integrated, more authentic than you were yesterday. You can catch yourself in performance more often. You can choose your masks more deliberately. You can create spaces where you set the mask aside and simply be. And gradually, over time, the gap between your persona and your authentic self shrinks, not because you've eliminated one or the other, but because you've integrated them. Chapter 22. The final reflection. Let me leave you with one final image, a return to where we began. Remember the ballroom full of masked dancers, everyone wearing elaborate Venetian masks so long that the masks have fused with their faces and they've forgotten they're wearing them. Picture yourself in that ballroom now, but different. You're still wearing a mask, because the dance requires it, because this is a masked ball, because completely removing the mask would end the dance. But now you know you're wearing it. You can feel the distinction between the mask and your face. You can adjust it when it becomes uncomfortable. You can lift it slightly when you want to truly see and be seen. You can choose different masks for different dances, and here's what changes. The dance stops being exhausting. It becomes playful. The mask stops being a prison. It becomes a tool of expression. The performance stops being desperate. It becomes creative. You're no longer trapped in the character. You're the actor, consciously choosing your role, and sometimes, in sacred moments, in protected spaces, with people you deeply trust, you might even set the mask aside entirely, and in those moments of complete authenticity, you glimpse something extraordinary. You see that beneath all the masks, beneath all the performances, beneath all the constructed identities, there is something vast, luminous, and free. There is consciousness itself. There is the self that contains all selves. There is who you truly are. Chapter 23. The questions that remain. So now I turn it back to you, not with answers, but with questions. Questions that will continue to echo long after this journey ends. Who are you behind the mask? Not the persona you show your colleagues, not the identity you project online, not the character you perform for your family, not even the self-image you've constructed in your own mind, but the awareness that watches all of this. Who is that? What would happen if you removed every mask, every persona, every performed identity? Would there be nothing underneath? Or would there be something more real than anything you've ever performed? What parts of yourself have you sacrificed to maintain your personas? What dreams did you abandon because they didn't fit? What desires did you suppress because they were unacceptable? What potential selves died in the darkness of your shadow? If you only have one life, this one, singular, irreplaceable life, how much of it will you spend performing? And how much will you risk on the terrifying possibility of simply being? What would authentic living actually look like for you? Not the idealized fantasy of authenticity, not the Instagram version of living your truth, but the messy, uncertain, vulnerable reality of showing up as you are. Can you love yourself? Truly love yourself? While knowing that much of what you call yourself is constructed, performed, borrowed from others? Can you honor the persona for its protective wisdom while not mistaking it for your entirety? And finally, the question that haunts all consciousness. Are we as a species, as a civilization, as a planetary consciousness, are we ready to recognize the collective masks we wear? Are we ready to face our collective shadow? Are we ready to become authentic not just individually, but culturally? I don't have answers to these questions. No one does, because these are not questions to be answered but to be lived. They are koans, paradoxes, mysteries that deepen the more you explore them. We've come full circle. From the first mask donned in firelight to the digital personas of our technological age, from the ancient Greek theatre to Jung's consulting room, from your individual crisis to the collective awakening. The mask you wear, the persona you perform, is both your protection and your prison. It allows you to function and constrains your freedom. It connects you to society and disconnects you from yourself. It is necessary and dangerous, sacred and mundane, wisdom and trap. This is not a paradox to be solved. This is a tension to be inhabited. This is the human condition, to live in the gap between who we are and who we appear to be, between authenticity and adaptation, between the self and its expression. Jung's great insight was not that we should eliminate this tension, but that we should become conscious within it. Know that you're wearing a mask. Choose it deliberately. Set it aside when you can. Never forget the face underneath. This is the work. This is the path. This is individuation, the journey toward wholeness, toward integration, toward becoming who you truly are. And perhaps, just perhaps, if enough of us do this work, if enough individuals wake up to their personas and integrate their shadows, if enough consciousness evolves from identification to awareness, perhaps humanity itself will awaken. Perhaps the collective mask will become transparent. Perhaps we'll create a civilization where people can be authentic and connected, vulnerable and strong, individual and collective, not as contradictions, but as harmonies. This is the future Jung envisioned. This is the echo of ancient wisdom reverberating into tomorrow. This is the possibility that emerges when consciousness becomes conscious of itself. Thank you for journeying with me through these hidden dimensions of mind and mask. Thank you for your attention, your presence, your willingness to look unflinchingly at the most difficult questions of human existence. The mask you wear is not your enemy, but it is also not you. Remember this, and in remembering, become free. May you know yourself beyond the masks. May you integrate rather than identify. May you become who you truly are. If this exploration resonated with you, if you're ready to continue diving deeper into the hidden mechanisms of consciousness, consider subscribing to Echoes of the Ancients. In the next episode, we'll explore the shadow, the dark twin of the persona, the repository of everything you've rejected about yourself, and why integrating it might be the most dangerous and necessary work you'll ever do. Until then, remember, you are not the mask.